in the cars, the camera's handheld, and it's in the passenger seat next to the driver, and you feel the road noise and you feel the dust on your face.
You could easily have made this a movie that's just cars moving fast. But I never feel like in Michael's movies he sacrifices character for any kind of spectacle.
Robert Nagle, stunt coordinator for the new Ferrari film.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. This should be fun.
The story of Enzo Ferrari, as told by Michael Mann, starring Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz.
Two objects cannot occupy the same point in space at the same moment in time. The corner races at you. You have perhaps a crisis of identity. Am I a sportsman? Or a competitor? If you get into one of my cars, you get in the wind. Slow.
A-list all the way, right?
Yeah, I mean they're top of their game. They're amazing talent.
Robert, your resume is a mile long. Cars are your specialty, right, in Hollywood?
Absolutely.
And there's a reason for that.
There is. I come from the racing world. I've just been drawn to mechanical things and how fast can I make them go.
Tell us a little bit about your racing background itself.
I started off drag racing, learned how to make horsepower, get it to the ground, and got bored with it. Then moved on to road racing, and that really captivated me.
So how did you transition from racing to stunting?
So there's two ways to look at it. The funny answer is I ran out of money racing.
Like everyone does.
Yes. And so I started making the transition from racing to driving on camera. Driving, whether it's crashing the cars or driving at speed. But oftentimes I was hired to drive cars like what's behind us at speed and not wreck them because we can't crash them. But they want them driven close to the limit. So I was known to for that genre, if you will, to really take a performance car and run it at its limit for a show.
In order to sell it on screen, you have to be at the limit, right?
Have to be very close to the limit, but there's another side to that, and that is sometimes the way you drive the car, especially through a corner, might be slightly different than how you do it for a race line, just to get a little better perspective of what the car's doing, make it look better for camera. So there's nuances that we have to find to make that look nice.
Your number one job is to keep everybody safe.
At the end of the day, absolutely. I have to design everything to mitigate as much risk as possible.
Any particular challenges in that regard for this movie?
This one was tough. I mean, if you look at the cars, they're open top. And that era, they didn't wear seatbelts. So I had to overcome that. My drivers all wore 5-point harnesses, but they're hidden by the wardrobe. We also had roll bars that were removable. So if we were doing anything precarious, we'd put the roll bars in, and then they'd digitally remove the roll bars. But oftentimes we didn't have the roll bars in.
When cars are running close together at high speed, there's always a chance that there could be a mechanical problem, a tire blows.
You know, the fact that we had built these cars from the ground up, and they were built by a team of guys that understand racing and understand how to keep cars going and how dangerous it can be if you don't stay on top of it. We were able to push these things really hard with confidence that they're going to stay together, and they were looked after. At the end of the day, front to back, top to bottom, they were gone through, make sure everything was perfect. So the next day, we had basically a new car.
Would you call Ferrari your biggest project yet?
I think so, yeah. It's, you know, it was a massive undertaking. Michael had been trying to get this off the ground for over 20 years. So to see it to finally coalesce and become a really tangible project was really amazing.
How did your prior work prepare you for this project?
Having known this project and known Michael as long as I have kind of gave me, I think, a step up in being able to handle this and really work with Michael and get his vision on camera.
And what was his vision?
Go fast.
So deadly passion.
Let's talk about the behind the scenes of the cast and crew and the cars. The cars are characters after all, right?
Yes.
They have this almost sense that they're alive in a way.
part of that feeling is you're dealing with a car that was literally hand-built from the ground up. The lines of that car and the shape and the curves, I think it speaks for itself that, yeah, it's alive. They're every bit of character as Adam is.
Now, Adam isn't really in the action sequences, is he? I mean, because Enzo's not a driver. He's the engineer.
Yeah, at this point, he's way beyond his driving years. And they don't really talk about but when he did race, he came to the realization there were guys that were much better than him at driving. But he was able to put together a package and race that package and be very successful, and that's what he focused on. The meat of the story takes place in 1957 Italy. Enzo is struggling to keep his business alive, struggling to keep his family together.
You were supposed to save him! You promised me he wouldn't die!
The father deluded himself!
And trying to figure out how to keep his name on the map and make it bigger, because he's not making money. And so the crisis for him at that point becomes the Mille Miglia. He has to win it.
Enzo, you're going broke.
How?
You spend more than you make.
So what do I do?
Win the Mille Miglia, Enzo, or you are out of business.
And so it's a big push for him to keep that together, the race team together, his wife together in life, and his business. The whole thing is it's on the verge of crumbling.
What is the Mille Miglia?
The Mille Miglia is a 1,000-mile race. It's a loop through Italy, and you're running through country roads at this point. Sometimes well over 130, 140 miles an hour. If you look at these cars, the tires are only 6 inches wide, and these guys are running them flat out down these roads.
As the stunt coordinator, you want to execute Michael's vision. How do you prepare your team for a project like this?
The guys I bring in, I work with often. Most of them do come from a professional racing background and have transitioned into doing car work on camera. Having that core team always with me is really, really helpful.
Once you find a team that you can really work with, you want to work with them over and over.
As much as possible, because everybody's relying on each other. Each person has to be in a specific point in time and spot at any given moment, because they're relying on the other guy to be at his spot in any given moment. If that doesn't come together, we have problems.
It's a dance, isn't it?
It is. It really is. If we can't photograph it, it's useless. So, again, it comes down to, at a given point, this is where the action needs to happen. This is where the cameras are expecting it to happen, and you want to see it there. The angles are set, everything's set up, the camera operators are expecting it, so everything has to fall together in those steps.
How often do you have to do multiple takes, Robert?
I like to say I'm usually getting it in the first 1 or 2 takes, and if we're crashing stuff, that's maybe all we have is 1 or 2 takes. So it's paramount that I get the choreography down and the timing down and everybody do what needs to be done, including camera, to get that shot.
Give us an idea of how you plan an action sequence with cars.
You're gonna laugh. I use Matchbox cars.
That's perfect. That makes total sense.
Sit down, we draw it all out, and we set the cars, and you're driving this car, you're driving that car, and we kind of step through it, a beat at a time. This car does this car does that, and once everybody has it down pat, and it's a nice visual to be able to see it, and you're looking at it from overhead of where everything should be, and it works out really well.
That makes total sense. It's three-dimensional, easy for everyone to understand their role, and then the big picture as well.
Yes.
Tell us about some of the drivers in this film.
Some of these guys have worked for me on other films. So Derek Hill, who's the son of Phil Hill, has worked for me in a couple films. We had Samuel Hubinet, the Formula D champion, has worked for me in a couple films. Tony Hunt, who's a USAC champion. We've worked together on a lot of stuff. Jeff Bucknam, who also worked with me on Ford versus Ferrari. His father, Ronnie Bucknam, drove the gold GT40 that finished third in the 1966 Le Mans. His son came to work for me on Ferrari, and when we brought him out and I tested him, he was too good.
What do you mean he was too good?
He was too smooth. He hit every mark perfectly, very smooth driver, very accomplished. And so I turned to my dear friend Ben Collins, AKA the Stig, and I said, you need to go ruin him. Yeah, we need to dirty it up a little bit.
And Patrick Dempsey is also in the film, is he not?
Dempsey is in the film, and he did just about all of his driving.
So what do you think?
There is no ashtray.
Are you a prima donna?
You ever try flicking ash out of a car at 200 kilometers an hour?
I'm offering you a brand new car which has the edge on Maserati.
Bullshit. The Maserati is faster, and it has an ashtray.
If I put in an ashtray, will you drive it in the Mille Miglia?
And he did a phenomenal job. And he literally would show up when we were testing, and he looked like a kid in a candy store. He did an amazing job.
A lot of times, films, I think, miss the mark because they are over-reliant on CGI. That's not true here, is it? Because you guys are doing as much as possible in actuality.
That's always been my goal, is to do as much as we can on camera, physically do it. From Baby Driver to Ford Ferrari to this film, Ferrari. There is a world where CGI and practical stunts, if you will, there's a marriage there that's viable. But the way it works is your subject matter needs to be real. The center focus has to be real. You can start manipulating the peripheral, kind of blend it a little bit, and then it works. But once you start manipulating your primary subject matter, your eye knows there's something not quite right, and you pick up on it. And for me, at least, it takes me out of the story. So if I can keep the audience engaged in that story, I think it pays off in dividends.
What's the most difficult part of your job?
I think initially it's just really connecting with the director and understanding his vision and how he wants to shoot this and what he's expecting to see, and then being able to deliver that, but also at the same time walk him through what's doable and what's not doable and how grounded in reality you want to stay.
It seems like a lot of times there's a temptation to step out of the bounds of realism with cars. And there's certainly a place for that in some films. But when I think back on a movie like Ronin, for example, you really believe that.
Ronin, yeah. One of my favorite car chases.
Yeah, an amazing chase. The French Connection is believable.
Yes.
Bullet is believable. There are other films I won't mention that just, they stretch the bounds, right? Yes. Do you ever find yourself riding that line?
No, I want it to be as real as possible, but I also want to push the boundaries and limits of people going, oh my God, I've never seen that, or that was amazing. For them to walk away with something like that, that's my goal.
Does realism have a limit in terms of what you do as a stunt coordinator?
Yeah, realism can have a limit, and that goes back to what I said earlier. Sometimes we have to drive the car a little different. Sometimes we overdrive the car. The body roll or the suspension compressing, all of that moving, or we'll overdrive the car and get that movement and make the car act, if you will.
Let's talk about some movie magic tricks. In order to sell it, you've really got to hide what you're doing, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, that is, as you put it, part of the movie magic. And one of the instruments that we utilize is this rig that I helped design with Allan Padelford, and that's called the Biscuit rig. And we can physically take a car like this and put it on the bed of this rig and run it at speed. And you will never know that it's not actually being driven. And that's how we fool you.
And that thing is custom designed from the ground up, right?
Yes, it's hand-built, engineered from the ground up.
What are kind of some of the specs on the Biscuit?
So the one I use for, we have 3 of them, but the one I mainly use, I call it sort of the sports car version. It's 650 horsepower. It'll do 150 miles an hour with a car on it. And as I like to jokingly say, it'll outrun most cars with a car on it. You
can configure it for whatever particular shot you need, right?
Yeah, so it's designed in a manner that the driving pod is movable around the platform. So depending on where the director wants to look with camera, we then move the pod out of frame and we fool you every time. We can mount cameras anywhere on there. And oftentimes we have 3 or 4 cameras rolling at the same time. You can almost, not quite 360 degrees. You can pan a camera, probably 270 plus degrees, to where you don't know that you're not, you feel you're on the car.
How do you accomplish the illusion of the car being on the ground? Because it is being carried by the Biscuit.
When we're doing really high performance stuff, typically we have what's called a car buck. And that is, you have the shell of the car, there's no engine, there's no suspension. And we set it on the bed of the Biscuit rig, and we're at ride height. So now you don't need to play with angles, you can have any other car up next to it, and it's completely believable.
Now the other camera car that's fascinating to me is the Porsche Cayenne.
That's fun.
Yeah, let's talk about that thing.
So the Porsche Cayenne, it's a Cayenne turbo. It's been modified. Its thing is around 700 horsepower. And we hang cameras on it, whether it be it's set up for a crane mount that we put on the roof and it swings around, or if it's really high speed, then we have a rig that mounts either on the front or the rear, and we can move the camera from ground level to about 7 feet in the air on the move. And the advantage of that is it's not limited to the speed that we can with an arm that's mounted to the roof. On an arm car, you're limited to about 60, 70 miles an hour. With the rig that's independent of that, and we take the crane off, we can do 100 plus miles an hour and chase race cars. It's movable on the fly, so we can come up to a car with it at ground level, and then raise it up and look over the car, and literally be just right on the vehicle.
Where does the camera operator sit?
So for that setup, the camera operator would sit in the front passenger seat. So he's got full view, but he's also got a big monitor, and that's really what he's looking at, is the big monitor.
How much did drones come into play for Ferrari?
We used the drones quite a bit. They were very, very useful in the settings we were at. We needed to get shots off quickly. Sometimes there wasn't a lot of room to fit anything else. And so I think we got some really cool stuff with drones in this film.
And were all the driving sequences shot in Italy on location?
100%. Everything we shot was in Italy. The majority of what we shot was actually all around the outskirts of Modena. There were some fantastic country roads that we found.
These cars are priceless. You're going to have to use the real thing in some scenes, but inevitably they're too valuable to drive close to the limit. So talk about using the real cars versus replicas in the film.
The Mille Miglia cars that you're going to see, the open-top cars, we hand-built all those cars. Because the real version of it is $30, $40, $50 million a copy. We did have a couple of real ones. The TDF that's in the Mille Miglia it's a real Ferrari that we borrowed from a gentleman in the UK. For the F1 cars, we had two Maserati 250Fs that were real. In that same genre, we reproduced two Ferrari 801s, and they don't exist, but we reproduced two of them, and again, built them from the ground up.
Were you involved in actually making the replicas?
I was very involved in that, and I was tasked to help find a constructor for the chassis and work with a constructor for the bodywork. There were two separate builders, and we wound up building the chassis in the UK and then bringing them to Italy, and once we're in Italy, they built the bodies, and some were fiberglass and some were aluminum, depending on what we were going to do with the car. If we were going to make contact or crash them, they were aluminum.
Yeah, because you want that to look real on camera as well.
Yeah, it just doesn't work if you're...
It looks real because it is real.
100%. We are having a few of the cars actually made from aluminum body panels, where the guys are hammering out the aluminum in the shapes necessary, hammer welding them together, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, to the point where it's like, we shouldn't even paint these cars, that you can see the craftsmanship. What
kind of support did Ferrari give to the film?
So Ferrari was super helpful. They have a historian there, and he was helpful in helping us recreate the Mille Miglia. The little details about the cars, we're able to see the actual build sheets from some of the cars, the real cars. So there was really a massive wealth of information available to us from Ferrari.
Inevitably, historical accuracy and artistic license will clash.
Yeah, there's always a bit of artistic license, because sometimes the truth is boring. So sometimes we have to spice it up a little bit, or sometimes you just have to tell it in a different manner so the story has a little more flow to it.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that, and it's aggravating to them when they say, well, that never really happened. But the one that stands out to me as an example is Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles having a fist fight in Ford versus Ferrari.
Now knock it off, Ken. We got work to do, and this car ain't going to build itself.
That never happened.
Yeah, and I'm sure you hear about it all the time.
Yeah, I know it was brought up. I think Christian brought it up with somebody, and they're like, yeah, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
But dramatically, it's funny.
Right. Yeah, it was very entertaining. Robert, were you able to develop any new techniques or procedures for stunt work on this film?
I'm always learning, especially with working with different directors and getting different perspectives. So I can't tell you specifically what I've learned, but yeah, I always walk away from each project learning something different and always trying to better myself in that way.
By the way, did you go to the LA premiere?
I did go to the LA premiere.
Yeah, how was it?
Amazing. First time I've seen the film in its entirety. I've seen pieces of it, so it was really nice to see it complete. It was really, really good film.
Did you kind of sit back and kind of take stock on the audience and see how they were responding to the movie?
They responded, and you'll know what I mean when you see it. Yeah, there's a couple breathtaking moments.
One race, 1,000 miles across open roads, will determine some, not all, of the issues that are colliding in these 3 months of 1957.
Ferrari, directed by Michael Mann, opens Christmas Day. Robert Nagle, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.